Right, so yeah, we've had some wider context stuff from John and Fielding so far, and now we want to start moving towards kind of Outlands and the details of that. So this panel discussion and Q&A is about DIY music culture and the institution, which I mentioned earlier, and how we work together to reach our audiences and kind of support what we do. So the general question for this panel is how can institutions work with independent organisations, right, to develop audiences to do this thing? Okay, so first of all, starting with Lukas, rather than me introduce everyone, Lukas, if you could just tell us your name, where you're from, and I don't know, what you think of the scene, your place in it, anything you feel like saying.
Hi, I'm Lukas Hornby. I run Fuse Art Space, which is in Bradford. Relatively new to the role, been doing it for a year, so quite new to the network as well. I think we're in quite a lucky position in Fuse in that, I guess everything that we do is experimenting in a sense. And I think that's how we'd like to look at it really, is that, rather than experimental, it's the active verb experimenting, and that retains for me what is the openness about experimenting that we try and define, and an open invitation to people to come to Bradford and perform and interpret that word, that type of music very broadly.
Great. To you, Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma. I'm based up in Manchester, but I'm actually from Milton Keynes originally. I kind of have three hats of things I work on. So Fat Out is something that I've been doing for the longest. Started that in 2008 as I kind of started putting on my mates' bands that were kind of in the sort of post-punk, experimental, alternative scenes, very inspired by kind of the alternative scene that was happening in Milton Keynes, and kind of took that to Manchester. And with Fat Out, I kind of was doing like regular shows, and then it kind of culminated to be based at Islington Mill in the venue space there, which we ran for 3 years. That finished in 2017, and then I've kind of gone on to be part of Outlands and then running Fat Out Festival, which is kind of a sporadic, when I can sort of bring it all together, festival that happens in Salford. I also am part of Sounds of the City, which is a festival that's been going for 16 years in Salford. Sounds is all about bringing promoters together across, predominantly from the Northwest, and ask them to curate a stage. So that it's a genreless festival, and it brings like everyone from sort of different parts, and kind of gives art promoters a chance to bring artists that are kind of emerging, because there's no, we don't want artists that have got any kind of notoriety or anything like that. We're kind of wanting what promoters are excited about at the moment. And then the third project I work on is Summer Beta, which is a residency programme based from Islington Mill again, and that is about giving musicians residencies. Islington Mill has got a huge history of visual arts residencies, and the success of that, of developing artist practices, we kind of noticed there wasn't that opportunity as much for musicians. So Rivka, we started that in 2014, and it's again just giving musicians paid opportunity to kind of come, spend time in predominantly Islington Mill. We've been working with metal and the NIMUS as well, to kind of develop their creative practice without any kind of focus on outcome. Often there is outcome, but it's kind of giving them that time to collaborate and to sort of like work on new projects. To me, like experimental music, like I don't really know what it is. I think it is kind of, it can sort of go into loads of different genres and kind of have, it's like musicians that are kind of brave and kind of don't like sort of conform to what necessarily needs to be popular, and that can kind of go across all different kind of genres, I think.
Great.
Hi, I'm Stewart. I'm Chief Exec of the Delaware Pavilion. I guess I'm the kind of part of the establishment, part of the, I'm a kind of archetypal arts administrator, Chief Exec of a kind of reasonably big MPO. However, I'm kind of interested in a number of things, and been really pleased to champion Outlands and kind of getting Outlands funded and working with the team and the network. I suppose the Delaware Pavilion in itself is a kind of rather odd proposition. I don't know whether you know it, but it's like a 1930s spaceship that's landed on the south coast in a small seaside town. there's this weird odd thing going on in the 1930s where a primary architect and emigre fleeing Hitler, almost we're very lucky to have, because he was fleeing Hitler and ended up kind of winning the Reaper competition for the pavilion. But also it's very little known that the senior Nazis' daughters were at school in Bexhill. So as Mendelssohn flees Hitler from Germany, the senior Nazis' daughters go back the other way. And you've got this rather wonderful socialist, democratic, amazing civic space, but that was funded by Delaware money that perhaps we shouldn't discuss that too much, but where did that money come from in the dim and distant past? Although our Earl Delaware, for which the building was named after, was a real progressive and helped to form things like the Arts Council and the Festival of Britain and some of that kind of early interdisciplinary forward thinking. So I guess my role in this is I kind of work with the system, but we want to use the system as a kind of asset to fund some interesting things and some alternative things and to disrupt it from within. Thank you.
Right.
Hi, I'm Lisa Meyer. I'm the co-founder and artistic director of Capsule. We're based in Birmingham. Started over 20 years ago, but to go back a little bit, I studied fine art sculpture, and when I was at university, I lived in an enormous student house with a huge basement, and we put on lots of DIY punk gigs of bands from across the country and also a lot of bands from Europe as well. And that really sparked my interest in both the visual arts and music. And I became the vice chair of an artist-led gallery called Birmingham Arts Trust. And at that time, this is mid to late 90s, culture was really ghettoised. There was visual arts and galleries and white-walled spaces, and then there was music, which was rock and pop, which was in another space, and the two never came together. And actually what we were interested in was making culture, making a space for the work that we were interested in, which is why we started Capsule and started to invite people to come and put on these sort of multidisciplinary events, because it was reflective of who, our peer group of the people that were making exciting work at the time. And then I went to Sonar Festival in Barcelona in 2001, and that was like a light bulb moment in that there was a concert in a beautiful Gothic church. And so the fact that they were using this incredible space, a space that I'd never seen music sort of performed in that kind of way. But it was with an artist called VVM. And I don't know if you know them, but they dressed as a love heart and a chicken. And then they had 2 cabbages on these decks. And then these huge pieces of, Spanish ham, like the legs of Spanish ham. And these were being flown out, the meat juice flying out into the audience. And then doing these versions of Lady in Red, Krista Burr's Lady in Red, but like completely messed up. And I was like, Jesus Christ, that is what I'm interested in. This is the space I want to inhabit. This is what I want to bring back to Birmingham. And from that, we did our first festival, Supersonic, in 2003. And I think, our lineup was everything from The Bug with the Warrior Queen to Coil to LCD Sound System to kind of grindcore bands, and VVM as well. But it was I didn't want to do the same type of events that I'd been to previously, like hardcore DIY all dayers, where you'd see the same 12 bands, the same genre over and over again, but rather to kind of make those connections between different artists and kind of build an atmosphere. So in terms of where we've come from, we are fans programming for other fans, and I think throughout our work, that's been our approach, because I don't know how to sing, I don't play an instrument, I don't know academically anything about music. It's very much an intuitive approach of like, if I want to see this, if I'm excited about it, I think there'll be lots of other people that will be excited about it. And so then that's our job to kind of bring those people together and kind of create that community around it. So in terms of experimental music, I think it's more the unclassifiable rather than naming it experimental. It's the stuff that doesn't quite fit easily into any space. And I think I'm sure many of us in this room, that's what we champion and give a space to.
Brilliant. Simon?
Hi. Is this working? Yeah. Hi, I'm Simon. I am now working as an independent creative producer, but previously I was curator of public programs at MK Gallery for the last sort of 10 years. And I was given a really incredible opportunity when our director joined, Anthony Spira. He approached me and said, do you want to develop a kind of events program from scratch? And basically we started a kind of a weekly program which was incredibly kind of informal as a sort of space to give opportunities for kind of artists to kind of present their work and to kind of test it out on audiences. And that over time kind of developed into, I guess, the kind of program that we have at the moment. But within that, I had a real passion for music and sound art and experimental music. And I wanted to kind of, you know, disrupt the system a little bit, as what Stewart said, you know, to kind of give a space for interesting underground work within that kind of program. I also grew up in Milton Keynes, so when Emma said that she was taking up the kind of scene up to Manchester, in a way you took it away, but I kind of tried to kind of keep it going. And I think, you know, I don't know if Luke Webb is in the room here, but those guys that sort of surrounded the kind of action beat scene, the noise band from Bletchley, were kind of really key to, you know, presenting interesting music in Milton Keynes. But obviously that was quite a precarious position. They used to do stuff at Bletchley Leisure Centre, which was this beautiful, crazy yellow pyramid that was designed in the 70s, which is sadly no longer there. So, you know, I think I had the opportunity to be able to give those guys perhaps a space to kind of present the bands that they're interested in and actually to sort of develop a bit of a community around the gallery. And I think that's what's always been really exciting for me. Milton Keynes is a very sort of strange place to grow up in. And obviously you have a lot of people leaving to go and study and perhaps never coming back. So, you know, for me, growing up here and the opportunity that I had, you know, being a sort of senior member of the team at the gallery, I think it was really important to kind of be able to kind of grow and sustain the community. Yeah.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you, everyone. So, okay, just to kind of start to get in some questions about this and trying to link that in some of the things you've just said. I think I want to start with kind of this relationship between the visual arts and experimental music, and also maybe understand, and I'm using the term experimental music as a shorthand, although I agree with everything you're saying, Lisa, and also some of the ways Emma and everyone talked about that word. But I'm going to use it as shorthand today, or possibly the word. So just to pick up on the relationship between visual arts and experimental music, Emma, you mentioned it at Islington Mill, that there was residencies for visual arts, and you kind of brought the sonic side of that in. And just to quickly say, Stewart talking about DLWP Pavilion, and you mentioned, you know, kind of using the system to disrupt it from within, which was quite a nice phrase. And I suppose it's worth stating. So I'm interested in asking you about this mix between visual arts and experimental music, right? So I should say that I worked at the DLWP Pavilion, and they allowed Outlands to form by giving me the time to kind of lead on this project. So without the DLWP Pavilion and that MPO and all of that kind of amazing history you outlined, I wouldn't have been able to help instigate this project. So there's already, and it's important to know that the DLWP Pavilion is funded by the local council and the Arts Council, right? And it makes money commercially as well. But two major fundings: local council and Arts Council. But the Arts Council, they don't fund the music part of the DLWP Pavilion, do they?
No. So, I kind of, just briefly, it's kind of worth saying that...
I am working towards a question, but yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to respond?
No, go for it, yeah.
So just briefly, because I think it's really important for that region, that the region in which we work in terms of live programme has been operating with Val Dunican and Ken Dodd and Panto. And I think that I was talking to somebody from Southampton last night as well. And kind of looking at that coastal strip, so Hastings is perhaps slightly different, but Eastbourne and Folkestone and all those places that you've got this history. And actually when the pavilion was invested in the early 2000s, the pavilion was pretty much on its knees. architecturally, and there was a need to kind of save the building.
Weren't they going to turn it into a Wetherspoons?
And rescue it from Wetherspoons. Would have made a pretty good pub, actually. But the auditorium itself, actually, Wetherspoons weren't, or nobody was interested in the auditorium. So you've got this 1,500 cap auditorium that nobody's interested in, and all the major funders, Arts Council, Heritage Lottery, a whole bunch of them kind of turning around and saying, this space is unviable, it's dead. What's really interesting about that actually that space to the community was really, really important. And what we did was we replaced Val Dunican with contemporary visual art that was funded by Arts Council. And that was a real shock to that community, but also that was cut off. The transport links aren't very good. There's high areas of deprivation and social mobility. So actually the exposure that our community had to contemporary visual art and that kind of shock of split is just really, really interesting. So there's just this kind of journey, and again, disrupting from within, using visual arts funding and focus, then to slowly disrupt and to do, and actually to go, this venue isn't redundant at all. Actually, this venue is at the heart of the community.
And it's, so to try and throw this to some of the other panel members, so my kind of question...
Caleb, can I?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just got one other thing to add, is just to say that also for us it's music. There's just a general music thing, that there's an opportunity for talent development, an opportunity right across the board with music for us.
Yeah, and I think this idea that for example, the DLWP Pavilion was kind of saved from ruin and treated as this kind of culturally important place, and the national culture through the Arts Council decided that visual arts was an important thing to fund, but music maybe wasn't. For me, I think that difference between music and visual arts could be traced back to a class issue. There's kind of folk music, and then there's a kind of the visual arts of the church and the state. And I think it's interesting that I've heard that people are encouraged to use their music programs to kind of pay for their institution to function and maybe pay for some of the visual arts. So to throw this up to other people, this kind of difference, if we're talking about funding and arts, is experimental music kind of protected in the same way visual arts? I'm not sure it is. Whether we can answer that, I don't know. But some of the other panel members, do you engage with visual arts organisations? Esmée, you've mentioned it. I mean, how do you engage with visual arts organisations, and why is it that this kind of music engages with visual arts organisations? Anyone feel like taking that? So maybe Islington Mill and the way that works.
Yeah, I mean, Islington Mill obviously kept started as a visual arts organisation, and then kind of ran this sort of squatty venue illegally for quite a while. Then it came sort of an established venue, and then that closed in 2017 because I stepped away from it and sort of no one came about. And now it's kind of back to visual arts. So, but then it's kind of during the sort of heavy music part of the Islington Mill era, if you like. So the mill's constantly changing and constantly evolving. The kind of crossover between visual arts and music was really, really strong. And now I think it's the mill at the moment is very predominantly visual arts focused, but now, as we've just recently got funding to get the roof fixed, and there's kind of talks of a new performance space opening up, there's kind of more musicians kind of getting involved in it at the moment. So I don't have a huge experience of visual arts in terms of like sort of big galleries and stuff, so I can't really comment on how protected that funding is. But from my experience, especially with Manchester, like the cross art forms within Manchester and Salford, we feed into each other and we inspire each other and we support one another's scene. And there's a lot of collaboration that's happening there in the Northwest, which I'm really lucky and sort of happy to support and be a part of. So yeah, I mean, I would love to see, like for me, where I want to see Fat Out and Samabita go, and what I'm really excited about is bringing visual arts and music together and kind of crossing over and making something new. And I think we've kind of got to a point where we're in 2020, like music genres have been stretched beyond recognition, and I think kind of how we're moving forward and to making something new is to collaborate across different art forms and bringing in different inspirations and working with different cultures to kind of create something new. And I think that should be supported and encouraged by funders.
Yeah, right on.
So I don't think that it's necessarily about the collaboration, but it's the value on the art form. And I think there's a value that's put on visual arts where it's subsidised and you understand that and you can go to a space and see it. And then with music, in whatever form it takes, there's an expectation that it will wash its face through ticket income. And so being able to take a risk around new work or things that need to evolve and investing in the artists, that's the bit that's what we are lobbying for, I guess, as part of Outlands, is that it needs the same time, care and investment as you would do with artists that are using a different medium, but they're working within, a gallery space and within visual arts. So it's not, I don't think it's necessarily about that you have to cross up, create these collaborations, but just about valuing the end result as equally.
Yeah, absolutely. Lukas or Simon, if you're open to it.
Yeah, so Fuse has a visual arts program as well. The nature of the space that we've got, it's just one room, like the event space you've got here. And so there's a necessity for this sort of common language between visual arts and music, because we inhabit the same space and it becomes part of the performance. If there's video work, we might leave that on during performance, and you sat around sound sculptures, so it becomes part of that. And hopefully that's how it's presented to the audience. There's a fluidity, but in the background there is a disparity between how it's funded, because the visual arts program is funded on a project basis, and the music program is not funded at all.
There you go. So again, interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
So MK Gallery is a kind of visual art MPO, so we're obviously supported to run our kind of gallery program. So yeah, I did sort of slightly feel like I was running a DIY operation within a bigger institution. The resources were really slim at the beginning, but over time we kind of built up the program, and I managed to secure some additional funding, and then develop partnerships that brought in funding from Norway or Portugal. That were really kind of key. But yeah, absolutely, it's you do feel like you're the kind of poor little brother in that situation a little bit. But I think it was more about bringing that sort of community together that was more important. And I think having the sort of resources to be able to do that, I think is key.
Yeah, and I think it's about resources. So I would just say that having promoted different types of music, and like promoting commercial music, is a very different thing than trying to host experimental music nights. And I think there's a whole infrastructure in place and a commercial kind of scene happening with genre-based music that isn't there maybe for some of the stuff that we're into. And I know, like your scratch nights, a lot of the artists that I meet mention coming through the scratch nights at MK, and it's kind of like one of those stops on the road, and it's like this adjunct to this big visual arts gallery. And so I suppose my provocation with Outlands is like saying there's a lot of big visual arts venues with big spaces, and then there's a lot of these scenes going on in precariously. Can we use those visual arts? Have we done that in Outlands? Use those visual arts spaces to host this music that doesn't fit in the commercial, scene.
Caleb, just an observation. I think there is a kind of, I think there's a whole bunch of gallery directors who are of a different generation, from a kind of slightly more counterculture generation, including Anthony here, and we also share some kind of very corporate finance support, but that are also our finance directors touring bands, and we have meetings in rehearsal studios and stuff. So there's this kind of whole slightly different culture going on, I think, within visual arts organisations. And actually, visual arts organisations, I think, are much more receptive to the crossover and the diversification of audiences and all those kinds of things. So I think that's what triggers a conversation between, the funding for experimental music and visual arts. I have a slightly bigger question, though. The bigger question is about kind of genre definition within music. Because, just to drop the kind of opera, just to drop the opera thing. Because actually I don't think those kind of institutions are actually that open to experimentation. And sure, there is a disparity, and we've had this at the Pavilion where Dear Surge or Outlands has been that kind of DIY arm of the Pavilion and hasn't been quite as well resourced or supported or taken on board. But actually, at least we're trying. We could do a lot more. But I would kind of also look to some more conventional music outlets that are in receipt of quite a lot of money and that aren't really doing their bit. So just to throw that in.
Yeah.
Our experience of working in Birmingham is actually the big music institutions it's impossible to work with them. We are having to hire those spaces. We're having to bring in the kit. And so, when we started, it was easier for us to use the upstairs of a pub because at least we could make it happen for 75 quid. If you use somewhere like Birmingham Town Hall, you're looking at about 10 grand by the time you've done the PA, the venue hire, and actually the value of bringing in new audiences and bringing in new types of work. It's not about that, I think, that for them, because they're so under-resourced as big institutions that it's about making money. And so there isn't that space. And I suppose if you think about galleries with public money, that if you see those as kind of, I guess, almost community centres, that they're meant to be at the heart of cities and towns, well, then they should be used for all types of practice. And maybe 100%. That's why they're more open to kind of housing that. But certainly kind of concert halls, there just isn't the space, or there isn't the resources from their end to be able to house this without us paying. That's what our Arts Council subsidy goes on, paying another big institution to be able to use their space. It's not going on the artist necessarily. It's not going on the team. It's going on a hire of a venue. So, yeah. That's where cultural shifts have to really happen. And I think we've been very lucky as part of Outlands that the partners that are bigger institutions have been incredibly generous, and something that we really haven't experienced in Birmingham. So it's it can be done in a different way. It's got to be a mindset though, hasn't it?
So I think we should put a stake in the ground with those things, and let's also talk about Spotify revenues or PRS or what are all those other channels of fund? I know that they're all complicated and got commercial implications, but there is serious money out there in other places that should be supporting this activity.
Yeah, I think with Outlands, going back to what you were saying, Lisa, the kind of the difference in the partners of the network and the sort of independence of the institutions, what we've been able to share, I think, has been much greater than sort of monetary value. Like the knowledge that we've got and the different experience we've got from both sides. Like from me, Outlands kind of came at a really kind of pivotal moment of where Fat Out was developing. I just closed a venue. I'd kind of gone from being a sort of co-director to being a sole director. And so what I learned from the DLWP and from Capsule in terms of say marketing strategies or like funding application, I've got kind of very limited experience of the funding world and kind of learning from that, and that's been really, really useful for kind of future for my business. I've never done a business planning strategy in my life, and kind of having kind of Lisa in a mentor role and being able to have access to sort of their knowledge, and then also from sort of our side, kind of being independent and kind of maybe sort of being slightly younger and kind of being very involved and still in the scene and being able to kind of having that engagement with artists and being artists ourselves, we then can kind of feed back into the sort of bigger institutions from a sort of maybe more fresh and sort of contemporary point of view. Yeah. So I think it's been kind of good from both angles, kind of having those different. So if it was just all independent, sort of me and Lukas sat on a table and kind of planning things, we might not be able to sort of progress as far without the institutions, and then vice versa. Maybe there wouldn't be as kind of relevant conversations happening if it was just the institutions around the table. And I think that's what's made Outlands so important and relevant and progressive.
Definitely, well said, well said. Right on. And I was, in Outlands, I was kind of worried about that power dynamic between the kind of larger MPO organisations with the spaces and the expertise and the funding departments and the kind of DIY members of the partnership. But actually, it's actually almost flowed the other way, and that the MPOs are kind of going, how do we support this? What you're doing is amazing. And I have to go to these really dry meetings and like you guys, I come to your meetings and you're kind of all like doing this amazing stuff. So it's kind of flowed the other way. So I'm kind of saying today, this is one way of leveraging funding is for DIY organisations to kind of team up with MPOs and then work that through. And Outlands as an organisation has kind of done that. We feel positive about it. You can get our email addresses, contact us if you want advice. And if you've done it, like, tell us what's happened as well.
But also DIY organisations, we were a DIY organisation
Of course,
with Capsule. We can move into being, I wouldn't say institutions, but we are now an MPO. So it did take 3 attempts over many, many years to kind of, I guess, to really, again, lobby for the fact that what we were doing was as valid as, our peer arts organisations. But you can move into that and still keep, your mission and your values and do things in the way, but just be able to pay your team, which is like, it's not a lot to ask. There's only 3 of us. We haven't got huge overheads, but there's no reason, that the funding should be there for everyone. Great art for everyone,
Exactly,
so this funding it should be available for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got to keep it joyous, though, when you move into that MPO, but that's another question. So I'd like to throw it open now. Is there anyone in the room that's got any questions or statements or things they want to say at this point? No, it's always really awkward, isn't it, when someone asks and everyone's like, no.
I'm kind of interested in this thing, so I do loads of different things, and one of the things that I've found pretty consistently in my career is that when you're working in like experimental music, whatever you want to call it, it often feels like jumping from one sinking ship to another, and you're just kind of moving as you can because everything is always precarious. And one of the things that I've come up against that I've noticed is like turning into a trend is, because I do a lot of writing, is often things come down from the top from people who sign checks in various institutions and they're like, great, we want this experimental music, we want to really champion this. And then after about 6 months, it's like, I don't really get what this is, and it doesn't seem to be making us any money, and the audiences are really small, so that's going to be, and I don't, the person who signs the check often isn't a fan of that music either, which I think is really important. And then that's always the first thing that gets cut when cuts come in. And I graduated from university in the financial crisis, so everywhere I've ever been has been making cuts at some point. And I wanted to ask you, on that basis, how, if Outlands is a way of like getting over that and kind of you being the people that sign the checks, and if you as organisers of Outlands have found that when you're dealing with like Arts Council and funders, you convince people that it's something that is worth something for more than that.
So we didn't have a mic. Did everyone at the back kind of hear that?
That was really long, sorry.
No, it was great.
It was about like basically, sustaining it, and after the kind of honeymoon period has worn off, how to convince people that it's still worth funding.
Yeah, well, I want to put that to the panel, but I would say we're coming to the end of our first phase of Outlands funding, and we're definitely in a precarious situation again. A lot of what you've just said completely resonates. So it's really well put. But yeah, I'd throw that over to the panel. So is that would you concur with that experience?
Yeah, I mean, our experience as Capsule, we were going from one G4A to another,
Yeah.
and then after our most successful 10th anniversary, we didn't get the funding, even though we delivered. We'd got the press, we'd got the people, but it was a competitive round, and then everything that we built disappeared. And so, yeah, I mean, being in that position has been very precarious, but I guess it's the tenacity to kind of keep going and making your own culture. And like I said, third time lucky, I was determined that we deserved MPO as much as any other organisation, and I just didn't take no for an answer in terms of knockbacks. So, kept on pushing for it. And then I suppose not through getting that and having I guess our business model is that and ticket income and other forms of income generation, we become more self-sustaining, which means that we can kind of, I guess, make our own path and not be so reliant on what else is going on around us. Obviously, we have to be responsive and reactive, but it's like trying to create your own solid core so that, you can still do the work that you want to do.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the network that we've got here in the model, it kind of adds checks and balances to, within the network and the conversation that we keep having, to maintain that idea that the program, the experimental music program, hasn't dropped after 6 months, because I think that we'd all work together to ensure that all the partners in the network are still on board with that idea, and I think that it's been proved already after 3 years of this model that we've got. So replicating this model perhaps, and is a good way to have that fluidity, and working within and without the system, as we probably do, if you want to look at it across that sort of DIY and institutional basis, then it's having that space to have the conversations and check in with each other.
Great.
I just wanted to say I've never seen. I've sat on lots of networks, regional networks, national networks. I don't think I've ever seen a network that's so committed and singing with one voice generally, because everybody's so passionate, and everybody's in a slightly different place, but everybody complements each other in coming together. And whether Outlands gets funded going forward this year, next year, or whatever, I think there's real strength in that network. And it's amazing to see so many people here this weekend to come together. I think there's power in numbers, and I think we have to remember that whether you're an MPO or a kind of old school 15k G4A recipient, that money's always very precarious. And I think if you can kind of be passionate about, if you can cut through all that, that transcends the money, then actually you appear to be joyous and passionate, and then the money will hopefully come, or it becomes sustainable in its own right. Because we're all at danger of cuts and reorganisations and all those. You only live from one funding thing to the next. All of us.
Comes from great ideas, doesn't it? Like if there's a passion and authenticity, and it will get funded. Like it will be hard, but I think we're all still here, aren't we? So we're making work.
And you've got to convince those venues that you were talking about that wanted to develop a programme and didn't really understand it in the long run.
I think I was also talking more generally, not just about institutions, but also about other media organisations, like publications, radio stations, across the board, basically.
Keep on going. Prove them wrong is what I say. Be true and power through it, because I don't know.
Yeah, but I think you've got to support the ecosystem. I think that's why publications like The Quietists, and without them writing about what we do and about championing the artists, they're helping us to get audiences. It's about there are other festivals like Supernormal. Like you've got to be part of it's a wider ecosystem, isn't it? You're not doing it on your own. So I think that's where it's a very unusual, a very unusual sector in that it's genuine support for one another.
Yeah, we've got to stick together and we've got to keep going, and we need to fight for it to be valued as an art form in the culture as other art forms are. Great. All right, it's coffee break time. So unless anyone's got any final thoughts. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to ask that there was a few comments about like learning around marketing and different kind of strategies, and just what the different organisations have found in terms of like the audience. Like, how has it been different for each organisation, or across a kind of more sustained kind of connected network? What has the experience been around audiences for different works?
I think it's always hard to get audiences for experimental music in Milton Keynes, but I think being part of this broader network has certainly put the gallery and Milton Keynes as a place on the map, and for artists to kind of think about that on the sort of touring stop. So I think, whilst they haven't been huge numbers, I think we've certainly seen a kind of an upward trajectory in terms of the numbers that we're getting for those gigs. So it's been really great for us. And I think also the accompanying the workshop programme that ran alongside the tours was also really important to kind of open up you know, the work of these artists to kind of new audiences. So yeah, but I still think there's a lot of work to do. Yeah.
I think if I compared like Outlands tours to when I was independent at the Mill, like me and Verity were like happy if we sold 20 tickets in advance and 30 people showed up. We were like, yeah, we've like made it. And yeah, for all the Outlands tours, I think my minimum number has been like 80 people, and then the final one with Kijaki, I think we had about 170 in. So like for me, it's been like Outlands has been really useful in just in terms of like how I market and how I build brands and all those kind of things that as a sort of DIY or sort of like didn't really even consider that. And Capsule were hugely helpful. Anna did a presentation about their marketing strategy, and I've really sort of implemented that. So for me, the audiences have really increased, even from the first Matana show, if I compared it to when we were doing it as an independent kind of experiment. Like if I put Kelly and Matana on at the Mill in like, I don't know, 2014 or something, I reckon that maybe like 30 people would have showed up, whereas when we did it at the Central Library, and again, I got to use Central Library because Outlands were able to pay that venue hire. I think we got like 100 people in the door, and it was like a really like one of the most successful shows up to date. So yeah, I think Outlands has been hugely helpful for my personal audience numbers.
I think I started to understand the idea of niche because in Birmingham it's notoriously bad in terms of audiences, and not just for experimental work. It's, you know, even like big headline shows of touring bands, it sells out across the country, and then there's always a date left in Birmingham. So I realised really early on that actually you needed the 10 people from Leicester and the 10 from Nottingham and etc., and that you could create critical mass by putting on something that was really special, and that they weren't going to see that anywhere else. And that's what drives audiences to kind of make work that sort of speaks to people. And I think it's not only about numbers, but how engaged people are in what they're seeing. So, you know, it can be for 100 people, but equally it could be for 1,000. It's dependent on the right context of the work. So, but obviously having additional funding to go towards marketing and, you know, being able to really be able to put time into that's hugely valuable for small organisations.
I think it's also just that audience development really means audience development, and I think you just said it, that it's the same for us. You could put commercial program on, and actually you need to put that commercial program on over a period of 5 or 6 years in order to get it consistently to be as strong as you want it to be. And it's the same with this, you know, that actually what's been achieved in terms of audiences is really, really powerful, but it's only a 2-year pilot, and you've got to that continuity, reinforcing the messages, reinforcing the marketing, keeping that flowing is exactly what it is, and getting the message out there. And it's going to take 10 years, and, you know, to properly reinforce that and link together what everybody's done. I just wanted to also just quickly just chip in, forgive me, but just to say, please get on social media today, and, you know, we are trying to secure future funding and get that word out there. So please, you know, please do join in and get some social media stuff out there, because that in itself is really important in building the advocacy for the group and building audiences.
But also that Outlands' intention is that it's not just us, that it opens up to other organisations.
Yeah.
Any more questions? I'm going to make sure this time. Okay. All right, great. Thank you to everyone on the panel, and thank you to the questions. Thanks a lot.